I want to move on to another story, big story that affects both Australia and the United States this week. Former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison got some backlash after he tweeted about meeting with Donald Trump in New York, but he also announced that Trump issued a strong signal that he will back AUKUS if he becomes president. It seems to me that a lot of people are missing the point of the tweet when there's actually this quite important story about AUKUS, given the rocky relationships between the current ambassador, Kevin Rudd, and Donald Trump, who might be the next president.
And look, that is exactly the point. The point is that Scott Morrison has access right now that we can't necessarily assume Kevin Rudd will have if the Trump administration comes back. And there is precedent for this. I keep bringing this up. Donald Trump, when he was in the White House, forced the resignation of the British ambassador to the United States when a private diplomatic cable was leaked that was criticising some aspects of how the Trump administration runs. And those comments were nothing compared to what the ambassador, now ambassador, but previous to his time as ambassador, Kevin Rudd, said about Donald Trump. So this is a real issue, whether you like it or not. And so I think the idea that AUKUS would be compromised is a stretch. AUKUS is a good deal for America. They're getting $3 billion out of us. They're getting increased access to the Indo-Pacific, and it's a good deal for us too. We already have the increased rotations of submarines in our region. We're going to have this long-term relationship, and we already have information and intelligence sharing that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And so it's not to say that we're getting taken for a ride, but there's no real reason Donald Trump would want to drop the deal. But his big power is being fickle. His big power is being unpredictable. And so the rest of the world sits on the edge of its seat trying to see what Donald Trump will do. And that's a big reason why we didn't have so many of these global conflicts while Donald Trump was in the White House. And so this is a real issue Australia is going to have to look at. And Scott Morrison's put himself right in the middle of it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that issue about the number of global conflicts under Trump is a big question for a lot of people about Joe Biden's foreign policy. But finally, I want to talk about the bonkers and bizarre Stormy Daniels hush money case. Wild scenes yesterday with Trump's lawyer calling out former Trump lawyer and personal fixer Michael Cohen as a liar. This was quite an extraordinary day of testimony. Tell us, how did this all go down?
Well, look, the theatrics of it is a big part of this because this is a high-profile case. And you have to remember, as much as this is being run on cable news networks in America, we've got CNN posting every update and graphics and special coverage that's been going for weeks now. The only people that really matter in this are those who are in the jury box. And there's only, by what we know from the jury assessment that they do in the United States that's been released, possibly one juror who'd be open to switching to Donald Trump's side. This is a very Democrat area. It's a very blue justice system by political appointees, which is also normal in the United States, but it's a fact here nonetheless. And so the question is, what difference is this going to make in the rest of the country? Sure, Donald Trump's probably going to face some fines. If he's found guilty, he'll have a criminal conviction against his name. Maybe he won't be able to vote for himself if he's recorded as a felon, but he's not really up for any potential jail time. So what we're talking about here is reputation, and so far he's doing well in the polls. He's doing better in swing states by this New York Times Siena poll than Joe Biden is, because his supporters are being emboldened by this, and everyone else in the middle is kind of tuned out of it. So it's certainly not having the negative impact that many would have anticipated.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you talk about the jury of 12, but then there's also the jury of 200 million or so voters in the United States. Is this case backfiring on Democrats who thought, everybody would be as outraged about this as they are, in the same way, I guess you could say, that Republican attacks on Bill Clinton in the 90s for various things involving personal peccadillos also backfired on them?
Yeah, and massively. And we don't know how this is going to land by the time Election Day comes around, because most people aren't as tuned into the US presidential election as you or I or our viewers. But at the same time, this is going to be likely the only case that runs before this next election. None of the other cases against Donald Trump are doing well. In particular, the Florida case is really stalled, the classified documents one. And so the fact that this is the only one, it's going to be very easy for him to paint this as political persecution by people who were out to get him. And so all it's doing is emboldening his followers. I tell you, I was at that Trump rally last week in New Jersey, and that was a huge turnout. I don't have any issue saying it was around 100,000. It was a massive crowd.
Wow.
And he asked the crowd who he is from Pennsylvania, and a lot of hands went up. And that's an important state. That's a must-win. So it's on for sure.
Absolutely. Annelise, Nielsen, thank you so much for your time.